Welcome back to the ISL report. What a great week. We're now 4 weeks in. We were down to 5 undefeated slots heading into week 4 and just had our second week of divisional matchups. And let me tell you, they did not disappoint. The early storylines have begun to emerge, and this is the place to have them broken down all season long. Thank you for all the feedback on the first few recap reports. Please keep them coming, as we are hoping to continually improve this and cater it to anyone who either can't catch the stream live or watched it live and want to dive even deeper into the glory that is the ISL. So if there's something you'd like to see or hear about, drop a comment below and we'll do our best to get it in. I mentioned this last week and it seems even more likely now, but we may get Systems himself on here for a regular 10 to 15 minute segment after the individual game recaps to give his take on the action. But in the meantime, keep the suggestions coming and thank you for listening. If you like any part of the recap, make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video and click that subscribe button for the ISL YouTube channel to help support the league and ensure you stay up to date on all things ISL. Of course, the best way to stay up to date with the ISL is to watch live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States. You can do this 2 places. First, at kick.com/systems, where you'll find Systems streaming all week long, and the ISL on Wednesday nights. The second place you can find it is at ISL.bet. Speaking of ISL.bet, that is the home of the ISL itself. It's where you can see the matchups, the standings, you can make your picks, set your lineup, and get in on the action yourself. Sign up is free and is open to everyone. Just create an account, verify your email address, and win. There's no affiliate code needed. There's no casino account required. You don't even need to be following Systems stream. Just create an account at ISL.bet, make your picks, set your fantasy lineup, and win each and every week. The weekly and season-long prizes total $40,000 for Season 1, and Systems has a standing offer of $1,000 for the first person to go 16-0 in your weekly picks. So get those picks in for Week 5 today after you get the inside scoop here with me. As we take a look at the standings in the ASC before we got into action in Week 4, Rich Raptors continued their undefeated season, are about to face their toughest challenge of the season in ASC East rival Silverback Mountain. Bloodsuckers Megaways and Kodiak Kingdom round out the undefeateds in the ASC heading into this week. The ISC is down to the top 2 fantasy scoring slots as the only undefeateds left after 3 weeks, with Hip Hop Pop and Dragonfall establishing themselves as heavy early favorites in what has to be seen as the weaker conference early on. Remember, Pick'em is only half of the ISL weekly and season-long prize pool. The fantasy game is just as easy, fun, and free to play. You just pick the 5 slots that you think will do the best given the scoring system. Each game win in the best of 5 matches worth 1 point, and a match win worth an additional 3 points. If a slot wins the first 3 games in a row, it's called a sweep, and they net an additional 2 points. Each slot can earn an extra point for each buy over 1x, 2 points over 3x, 4 points over 10x, and 25 massive points for a max win. Choosing the wrong slot can hurt you though, as a slot loses half a point for any buy under 0.1x, 2 full points for a 0x, and 1 point if they are swept. Well, that's it for the fantasy. Let's get on to the matchups in Week 4. First up, we had Razor Returns from Push Gaming at 1-2, taking on Sweet Rush Megaways, who's actually the only one of the 3 B Gaming games with a win so far, and they come in at a respectable 2-1. This one started out slowly as neither slot could muster over 0.17x, and Razor Return takes the early lead in Game 1. But Sweet Rush was just getting warmed up as they stormed back with 3 profitable buys in a row to send Razor Returns to Davy Jones' locker with a 1-3 record and just 1 fantasy point for the Game 1 win, while Sweet Rush continues to carry the B Gaming banner with a 3-1 record and a very solid 9 fantasy points in the 3-1 victory. On to matchup number 2, the Charging Grand Heist feature buy at 2-1 with 2 wins in a row in the One Touch stable takes on stream favorite but ISL pariah at 0-3, Dr. Rock and the Riff Reactor from True Lab. This one was an edge of your seat back and forth battle down to the last buy. Dr. Rock showed up huge in a close Game 1 where both slots profited. Grand Heist then came back with a last spin win in Game 2 and another close one in Game 3 to push the Doctor to the brink. The Rocker clutched up big with a big 1.55 to 0.33 Game 4 win, but our first Game 5 of the day saw Grand Heist slam the door with a 1.88 and Dr. Rock whimpered away with a 0.28. Grand Heist moves to 3-1 in the ultra competitive ASC East and eagerly awaits the outcome of the the Rich Raptors versus Silverback Mountain battle later on today while stacking up 8 fantasy points. Dr. Rock at 0-4 is nearly out of the playoff race already given their tough division, but they did put up 4 fantasy points with 2 buys over 1x and 2 game wins as a consolation prize. On to matchup number 3, we saw B Gaming's Bonanza Billion hoping to get its first win of the season against a 2-1 massive studios entry, Super Mega Monsters, who was having some technical issues, which forced a last-second commissioner call, and these slots were moved to a neutral site where this matchup was played out in play money. Fans of other unnamed slot streamers felt right at home as this one played out with no real stakes to speak of. That didn't stop both slots from putting on an incredible show though, and unfortunately for System's Wallet, the single biggest multi of the day came in Game 2 of the free play matchup as Monsters jumped out to a 2-0 lead with a 5.45x on the heels of a 1.84 Game 1. Bonanza Billion got something going for the first time all season in Game 3 with a 1.35x win, and then it looked like disaster struck for Monsters as they let Bonanza Billion into a Game 5 with an embarrassing 0.03 to 0.11 loss in Game 4. But the Monsters came up mega in Game 5 and they averted disaster with a 1.16x win, improving to 3-1 on the season and grabbing 9.5 fantasy points despite giving a half a point back in Game 4. The season to forget continues for Bonanza Billion as they can't capitalize, fall to 0-3, but do accrue 3 fantasy points for their managers with 2 game wins and 1 over 1x. Matchup number 4 was a big get-right opportunity for both Quick Spin's Hammer of Vulcan at a disappointing 1-2, squaring off against Push Gaming's Retro Tapes, who was the last slot in the ISL to record a winning buy, let alone a match win thus far. This one looked like it was going according to plan as Hammer jumped out to a 2-0 lead and grabbed some extra points with a 3.37 in Game 1, but they choked big time in Games 3 and 4, losing both with sub 0.1x games and even gave half a fantasy point back in Game 4 with a point sub 1x. Retro Tapes was never really a threat to win though, and Hammer stopped shooting itself in the foot Game 5 for an easy 0.87 to 0.1 win to move to 2-2 and net 7.5 fantasy points on the week. The nightmare continues for Retro Tapes as they fall to 0-4, but do grab 2 fantasy points with those game wins. I will harp on this every week because it's so astounding, but in 4 full weeks of ISL action, Retro Tapes has a high multi of 0.49x. Every other slot in the competition, even the ones like Penny Pelican and Cabin Crashers, have multiple profitable buys, and Retro hasn't even gotten half of a buyback yet. Truly a sight to behold. Matchup number 5 featured Pragmatic's fan favorite Sweet Bonanza, reeling after 2 straight losses, taking on surprise early undefeated Bloodsuckers Megawave from Red Tiger, who hope to extend their already commanding 2-game lead in the ASC North, but Sweet Bonanza was having none of that as they easily dispatched Bloodsuckers in a 3-0 sweep, reminiscent of their Week 1 destruction of Grand Heist. 2 profitable buys coupled with the sweep gave Sweet Bonanza fantasy managers a week leading 10 points, while Bloodsuckers Megawaves crashed back to earth, losing a point in the sweep. Matchup number 6 was the matchup of the season thus far as we had 2 huge favorites and ASC East rivals butt heads. Games Global's Silverback Multiplier Mountain was looking to get back in the win column after an insanely close loss last week in 4 games to Space Wars 2, while Phantasma's Rich Raptors has coasted to a 3-0 record and looked to put the entire conference in a headlock with a big early win over a co-contender. This one looked every part the possible ASC championship preview that it was hyped to be coming in. Rich Raptors came out of the gates firing on all cylinders, winning Game 1 with over 3x and Game 2 with a 0.66x. Unfortunately, Silverback seemed to wear the Dinos down as Rich Raptors scored lower and lower as the matchup went on. Game 4 was Raptors' best shot to close it out as Silverback faltered with a 0.42x, but they couldn't close the door, and Silverback decisively wins Game 5 to create a 3-way log jam in the ASC East and gather 6 fantasy points for their managers for the match win. Rich Raptors has the pressure of an undefeated season taken off their tiny dino shoulders, but still get a healthy 4 fantasy points in the loss with 2 game wins and 1 bye over 3x. Matchup number 7 had our biggest mismatch of the season thus far as winless early relegation favorite Penny Pelican from B Gaming stepped into the ring with undefeated MVS contender Hip Hop Pop from Avatar UX. And this one was very nearly the upset of the century. It was business as usual in Game 1 as the endangered Pelicans appeared to have gone extinct with a 0.09 start. Games 2 and 3 saw the return of the long-lost Pelicans though, and Penny flipped the switch and had Hip Hop Pop squarely on the ropes. Game 4 left me breathless as Hip Hop Pop pulls a drive-by at the very last moment to max out the box and narrowly force a Game 5 0.99 to 0.93. Pelicans disappeared in Game 5 though, and the Rappers held on to become the first 4-0 team in the ISL. They also compiled another 8 fantasy points, cementing themselves as a consistent early leader in both categories. Despite the valiant effort, Penny Pelican falls to 0-4. They do get 2.5 fantasy points though with the 2 game wins, profitable buy, and buy under 0.1x. On to the halfway point in matchup number 8 where we had last week's $37,000 saver and current single game record holder at over 38x in Choco Reels Reels from Wazdan, hoping to improve their 1-2 record against underwhelming Booming Games entry King Kobe, who was looking to get in the win column for the first time this ISL season. And in an underwhelming performance by both sides, Kobe comes through in the clutch for the Game 5 win as Choco Reels drops sub 0.1x performances in both Games 4 and 5 to hand the victory to the Snakes. Both slots are 1-3 now. Kobe scored a respectable 8 fantasy points with the win and 2 profit buys, while Choco Reels only get 2 with 2 game wins, a profit buy, and the 2 games under 1x, taking some points back. Matchup number 9 put Boom Boom Gold at 1-2, representing Three Oaks Gaming, up against Push Gaming's Big Bamboo, who improved to a quiet 2-1 in week 3 with a Game 5 win over Sweet Bonanza. Big Bamboo hoped to turn things around this week for Push Gaming, who had gone 0-2 coming into this matchup, but this was more of the same for our friends at Push, as Boom Boom put the boom on Big Bamboo with one of the more dominating sweeps we have seen thus far in the ISL. Boom Boom nearly gets over 1x in all 3 buys en route to a week-tying 10-point fantasy performance, while Big Bamboo does its best retro tapes impression with no buy getting better than 0.51x and losing a fantasy point in the sweep. Matchup number 10 saw a quick spin Cabin Crashers game that looked to put some respect and its first win on its name against 2-1 Space Wars 2 PowerPoints from NetEnt, who have come to life, winning their last 2, and the first buy looked like there might be some zombie magic in the air for Cabin Crashers as they put up their best performance of the season thus far with a 3.64x. Things went sideways to say the least after that, as they had a combined total of 0.06 over the next 3 buys, throwing back-to-back 0x's in for a negative 1.5 fantasy points despite winning game 1 with over a 3x score. Space Wars takes care of business, moves to a very quiet 3-1, and gets a very nice 8 fantasy points with the win and 2 buys over 1x. Matchup number 11 was a huge matchup between ISC West contenders, both at 2-1, both chasing Hip Hop Pop. Sheep Gone Wild from Red Tiger against Crystal's Digger from Bellatra. Who would get the upper hand? Crystals would, that's who, as they sweep the Sheep, who just couldn't get any 4 scatters and kept striking out on the bonus picks. The Digger's consistency has seen it rise up the ranks after a very close loss to the still undefeated Hip Hop Pop week 1. Digger gets 9 fantasy points with the sweep and buy over 1x, while Sheep Gone Wild scores negative 1 point with the sweep loss and fall further behind in the ISC West. We got on to matchup number 12, another really tough one to predict, as we had undefeated Dragonfall from Blueprint Games looking to extend their ISC North lead to 2 games over Relax Gaming's Sloth Tumble coming in at 2-1. Both slots have been very consistent, and this looked to be a heavyweight battle going in, but Dragonfall must not have got the memo, as they didn't put up a fight. They put up one of the most disappointing performances of the week while getting swept by the Sloth. Their high score was a 0.38x. They lost a fantasy point for one of the top performing slots coming in. Sloth moves to 3-1 despite not even having to break a sweat with a high score of 0.77. The sweep was good enough to get them 8 fantasy points though. Lucky matchup number 13 gave us 2 1-2 slots from the ISC North, both hoping to keep pace with the slots we just saw, as Royal Potato from Print Studios took on Cat Clans 2 out of Games Global, where we saw our 3rd sweep in a row, in a matchup most would call a major upset, seeing the Potato dispose of the Cats. Game 1 saw the Potato upgrade twice and put up a very nice 1.98x. Cat Clans could never get going this week, as they turned in a 0.33x top multi while falling to 1-3 and losing a fantasy point. Royal Potato moved to 2-2 and scored 9 fantasy points with a sweep and a buy over 1x. Matchup number 14 featured an insane battle between No Limit City's Hoarders and Blueprint's Rise of Atlantis. Both came in at 1-2 and needed a win, looking up at previously undefeated Bloodsuckers in the ASC North, and we got our 4th sweep in a row somehow, and our 6th of the week, as we saw Hoarders continue their climb back to the top with their 2nd win in a row. While not posting any huge numbers, Hoarders just edged out Atlantis in games 1 and 3 with respectable results over 0.85x, and capitalized on the Atlantis rip in game 2 to notch the sweep in 8 fantasy points, while week 1 darling Rise of Atlantis falls to 1-3 and loses a fantasy point in the sweep, posting a top multi of 0.85x. Rounding the final turn, we had matchup number 15, where a slot that was recently relegated from the SPL, Gates of Olympus from Pragmatic, taking on One Touch's Wild Coyote Megaways in a pivotal ISC East matchup, as both came in tied with Super Mega Monsters at 2-1, who won earlier in the week. While the Coyote was indeed wily again in this one, Zeus had just enough lightning bolts to send him packing in a drama-filled 5-game match. The Coyote posted an early lead with a 1.55x game 1, but could not capitalize, as they followed that up with a 0.14 and 0.16 in games 2 and 3, giving Gates the 2-1 lead. Game 4 saw a mega rip from Gates, landing at sub 0.1x and losing Fantasy Manager's half a point along with the round, but the Coyote couldn't pull another Road Runner out of its hat in game 5, and Gates cruised to the 3-2 match win, moving to 3-1 on the season, but only getting 6.5 fantasy points, as they had a profit buy but also won under 0.1x. The Coyote falls to 2-2 on the season, but adds 3 fantasy points with the 2 game wins and the 1 bye over 1x. The last matchup of the week was incredible, giving us undefeated Kodiak Kingdom from Games Global against 2-1 Mental from No Limit City, both out of the ASC South, and this one proved pivotal in the early standings as Mental pulls the upset and leaves Hip Hop Pop as the last undefeated slot in the ISL. Kodiak Kingdom appeared to be headed for Sweeptown after seemingly feeling the pressure of being undefeated in the primetime game of the week, only putting up 0.14 and 0.17 for the usually reliable bear slot. Mental took full advantage, winning the first 2 and hoping for the kill shot with a very tough 1.05 in game 3, but Kodiak fought back with a 2.12 forcing a game 4. Mental was just too much today though, as they kept the pressure on with a 1.2 and Kodiak couldn't keep up with a 0.51, giving the match to Mental, who joins Kodiak Kingdom at 3-1 on the heels of Hip Hop Pop. Mental grabbed 9 fantasy points with the win and 3 profit buys, while Kodiak gets a measly 2 with a single win and profit buy. We had a very low ceiling fantasy week, which translated into a huge financial loss for systems today. We only had 3 slots go over 3x, and the biggest multi of the day on Super Mega Monsters was on Play Money. Brutal. Despite that, we did have 2 slots get to double digits in fantasy points this week, as Boom Boom Gold and Sweet Bonanza both get 2 profitable buys while sweeping their opponents to get their fantasy managers the most points available this week with 10. With so many sweeps and so few profitable buys, the bottom of the fantasy barrel is particularly ugly in week 4. An astounding 7 slots scored negative fantasy points, with 2 teams that were undefeated coming into this week among those in the Hall of Shame. Sheep Gone Wild, Rise of Atlantis, Cat Clans 2, Big Bamboo, Bloodsuckers Megaways, and Dragonfall all scored negative 1 point by getting swept and not profiting. But our old friend Cabin Crashers was not to be outdone. They managed to score a negative 1.5 points despite winning a game with a 3x by following that up with a 0.06 and 2 consecutive 0x's. Just shameful. There's only 1 undefeated slot left in the ISL, and they have a commanding lead in terms of fantasy, and that's Hip Hop Pop. They have 35 total points so far this season. That's 8.75 points per week for them. What might be most impressive is how they're doing it. They only have 1 sweep, but out of their 16 games, they have 5 buys over 1x and 1 over 10x. They've only gone to a game 5 once, and they're holding their opponents to an average of just 1 fantasy point per game. Incredible start here for Hip Hop Pop. We have 2 surprise slots at numbers 2 and 3 so far this season, and I just wanted to take a second to highlight them. In second, we have Super Mega Monsters at 30.5 points. They've gotten at least a 1x each week, with 5 of them total to add to their 3x and 2 sweeps. They did lose half a point with a 0.03 this week though. Right behind the Monsters, we have Crystal Diggers at 30 points, who after a 1-point performance week 1 has stormed back with 10, 10, and 9 points in the last 3 weeks, showing us just how consistent they can be. Their points come from buys over 1x and impressively 3 sweeps in a row to go with no negative points. While slots like Penny Pelican and Retro Tapes are off to bad starts in fantasy, Cabin Crashers is head and shoulders above, or below I guess, everyone else. After 4 weeks and 16 buys, Cabin Crashers is at an incredible 0 fantasy points. This is despite winning 1 game in every single match so far, posting 2 buys over 1x and 1 over 3x. How have they pulled this off? By giving all of those points back with horrible results to the tune of 4 games under 0.1x and 3 0x's. To put that in perspective, Choco Reels is the only other slot to even have 1 0x, and they've paired that with the single best result in the ISL thus far with a 38x. So for Cabin Crashers to have 3 of them and none of the upside is truly amazing work. All of the remaining undefeated slots from the ASC fell in week 4, and now the dogfights begin. 3 of 4 divisions in the conference have ties at the top, including 3-way ties at 3-1 in both the ASC East and the South, setting up pivotal matchups each and every week moving forward. The Hip Hop Pop reigns supreme in not just the ISC, but the entire ISL as the last unblemished slot, but Crystal's Digger is charging hard to challenge in the ISC West. The other divisions also look packed as the likes of Gates, Mega Monsters, Dragonfall, Sloth Tumble, and Sweet Rush Megaways all hope to start their push to the top of the conference. Avatar, UX, and Balatra have taken the early lead in individual game win percentage, as both are over 75% with their 1-slot entries. Pragmatic and One Touch are both over 55% in individual game win percentage with their 2-slot stables, which is very impressive as well. Push Gaming had an awful day as they fall to just a 38 win-loss record, with B Gaming right behind with 40%. Week 4 is in the books and week 5 is already upon us. Some incredible matchups to look forward to in week 5 as we have our 3rd division week primed and ready to go. After week 5, every slot will have played every other slot in their division once, so huge stakes for the week. First up for me, undefeated Hip Hop Pop versus Sheep Gone Wild. Really intriguing matchup as early undefeated favorite Hip Hop Pop faces 2-2 Sheep Gone Wild. The Sheep have shown the ability to hang with anyone, and if they can get just a little forescatter luck to finally come their way, we could see the champ dethroned. Second up is the battle for the ISC East as 3-1 slot Gates of Olympus and Super Mega Monsters duke it out. The Monsters have been flying under the radar a little lately, and Gates is, well, Gates. The winner of this matchup will take a commanding lead in the division. The third marquee matchup in a week full of them has to be the ASC East battle between Rich Raptors and Grand Heist. Raptors are the early Super Bowl favorite, but are coming off their first loss of the season to the hands of Silverback Multiplier Mountain. Meanwhile, Grand Heist has been on a tear since its week 1 hiccup, where it was swept by Silverback Multiplier Mountain themselves. Will the Raptors' low volatility be Grand Heist's kryptonite, like the Silverbacks was, or will Grand Heist stay hot and send the Raptors reeling? I, for one, can't wait to find out. Thank you for joining me on this edition of the ISL Report. Please like this video and subscribe to the ISL YouTube channel. Both are as free as the competition itself. Speaking of that, head over to isl.bet now, get those picks and fantasy squads locked, and tune in on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in North America for the next edition of the greatest event in slot history.